Well, greetings to the brightest audience in America. Thank you so much for tuning in. We are at round 5 of the hydroplate controversy, and I found a really neat tool that'll get us up to speed really fast. Let me add this to the stage and make myself smaller. And what you'll do is you'll go into, let's make a new tab here, go into hydroplate.org, hydroplate.org. And then you're going to go into hydroplate resources, go down to hydroplate controversy, and then you're going to go into the timeline. And this is really cool. Let me just double check, make sure you guys are seeing what I'm seeing. Yeah, you should be seeing everything I'm seeing. Okay, the creation hydroplate timeline. And it might just look like 2 events, but that's not the case. There's a whole bunch of things. There's a whole bunch of things right here. Well, how do you get them in order? Well, this is the really neat thing. Uh-oh, what did I do? Go back to the timeline. The really neat thing is, let's go back here. When you click on this, it'll show you what happened there. Holroyd's work of 1986 showing one unnamed, unpublished lake dammed by the Kaibab Plateau. But then you go back, and then you can just go to the next thing that happened in the timeline. This is the map that Austin tried to say showed that he had priority over Dr. Brown in discovery of Grand Lake. Notice that this map has no Grand Lake shown, nor does it give a breach point, elevation, or any other information that Austin claimed he discovered. And we did not show this before. So this is stuff you can look at on your own time. And let's see, we'll go back, go on to what happens next. This is Austin's 1989 Grand Canyon guidebook that Austin, quote, accidentally, unquote, inserted a 1988 copyright title page into after first claiming to Dr. Walt Brown that this 98 publication proved that he, Austin, had priority over the discovery of Grand Lake. So it's a 1989 guidebook with a 1988 copyright. So let's take a peek at this. And it goes down and down and down. So you can take a peek. And what else happens here? Dr. Brown's discoveries of how the breaching of Grand Lake, discovered by Brown, formed the Grand Canyon, published for the first time in his 5th edition, 1989. This followed several months of radio interviews and lectures. Let's take a peek at that. And so here's his section on Grand Canyon. So yeah, you can take a peek at this, and this is where you find it, which is really cool. Really excited about this tool. It's going to make this timeline so much easier. And then Steve Austin's 1990 guidebook, now populated with Dr. Brown's previously discovered and published 1989 Grand Lake, its separation from Hopi Lake, its breach point, Marble Canyon, and elevation 5,700 feet, all without attribution to Dr. Brown. Okay, and the 1980, that was 1990. So we jumped ahead a bit. This was 1990. We're going to jump ahead 3 years, and this is a letter from Brown to Morris, which we read in round 1, and then Brown's letter to Steve Austin. We read that one too. And from Austin to Brown, the response from Brown to Austin. And then this is the letter from Brown to Brown's response in his letter of June 18th. Oh, this letter of June 18th. Okay. Yeah, alrighty. Okay, but we read all those in round 1. And then we moved on to, let's see, where was this? Brown to Austin. Yeah, we might not have read all of these, but this is the timeline where if you want to jump into the details, I want to get up to the mediation response. Brown to Morris, so you can read all these letters. Some of these we read, some of these may have fallen through the cracks. I wish I would have known about this tool earlier, but they finally go into arbitration. And I want to see what happens after arbitration. So there was this letter to David Coppage. We read that. That's setting up the arbitration. There's a book count issue, personal memorandum of mediation between Brown and Morris. Okay, and then Holroyd's. I don't think we might have read this one. Brown's memorandum. Okay. So this is what Brown wrote about what happened at mediation. So this would probably be around round 3 or 4, but I think this will be important. Personal memorandum of mediation between Brown and Morris / Austin, which was conducted June 21st, 1994. So this is what Walt Brown says happened. Let's see, is this all the way? Yep, this is it. Okie dokie. So let's take a look at what Walt Brown said happened at the mediation. Personal memorandum of mediation. Some words in the memorandum were not spoken or read during the mediation, but are indicated for clarity or amplification. When these words are not obvious to the context, they are placed in the brackets. See, Dr. Walt Brown wanted it to be recorded, but they did not. So these are his notes that he took. On Tuesday, June 22nd, 1994, Doctors Henry Morris, Steve Austin, and I met for a day of mediation at a branch office of Pepperdine University next to Los Angeles' Orange County Airport. 4 lawyers mediated our dispute. Judge Jack Crickard, a retired judge appointed by President Reagan to the Los Angeles Superior Court. Gregory W. Wood, an expert on copyright law. Peter Robinson, a professor at Pepperdine specializing in dispute resolution and former executive director of the Christian Conciliation Service, and Catherine Blankenship, a non-voting mediator who arranged the meeting. Catherine told me earlier that she wanted to come to see what would happen. My morning flight from Phoenix was on time, so I arrived first at 10 a.m. for the 10:30 meeting. Morris and Austin arrived at 10:15, and the others during the next 30 minutes. Peter, talking to Catherine, mentioned having read the background material Catherine had reproduced and delivered to the mediators. That was a relief to me. As the day progressed, I could see that Peter was the only one who had properly done his homework. Judge Crickard had done practically none. Although Judge Crickard was the most prestigious member present, Peter took charge, broke the ice with friendly questions about our families and backgrounds while we waited for Gregory Wood, and arranged our seats in this large classroom. I sat in the middle of one side of a makeshift 10 by 4 table across from Austin and Morris. 2 lawyers sat on each end. Peter opened with a round-the-table prayer. The cordial atmosphere existed all day. Opening issues. Judge Crickard asked Morris and I to describe the size and influence of our respective organizations. Afterwards, Morris asked what could be discussed afterward about our mediation. He said that all of ICR, 50 people, would want to know what happened. One person thought nothing should be said, and another thought that was unrealistic. I mentioned that outsiders were hearing things from Austin. For example, Paul McKinney called me 2 days earlier and commented that Austin told him that I was suing Austin. Austin registered no reaction. I suggested we decide what should be said at the end of the mediation. All agreed. Peter asked all the mediators to meet privately outside. As they left, I asked Catherine if audio taping was permitted. She pointed to a tape recording of this September 18th, 1988 radio broadcast I had mailed her, thinking I was asking about it. Apparently, she had not reproduced and distributed it. When she realized I was asking about taping the mediation, she said, no, it's confidential. I had proposed audio taping in an earlier letter to Catherine, but had not heard anything since. The manual for CCR, Center for Conflict Resolution, said mediations and arbitrations could be recorded by any of a number of means if the parties agreed ahead of time. The private conversation between Morris and Austin and me were friendly and relaxed. Morris asked me whatever happened to his seat on CSC's board. I told him he came on the board asking that he be only for the transition period of 3 years, January of 1983 to January of 1986. We closed down in Chicago in August of 1985. I asked Morris and Austin how many copies of Austin's new book had been published. To my surprise, neither knew. They guessed 5,000 to 10,000. When the mediators returned, Greg Wood gave a 10-minute seminar on copyright law. I sensed this was directed at me, although nothing Greg said fit specifically. Morris asked for details on fair use of copyrighted material. I was already aware of most of this. Fair use allows using copyright material in the public interest, such as in classrooms. Greg said that trying to beat the publisher out of a sale is not fair use. Apparently, Morris and Austin would maintain they did not need permission to print copyrighted artwork because it was fair use. Later in the day, Austin said that only about 100 copies were produced of the copyrighted editions. Although the number printed had little bearing on copyright infringement, I think ICR printed more, since I recall that more than 100 went on some of their trips. Peter wondered if we should first address the issue of Austin's alleged plagiarism from me. Morris suggested that I initiate this process. I began. I said this was not just a plagiarism issue. I had never objected to someone taking my work without crediting me. It had happened many times. I knew Henry Morris felt the same way. I have not objected when someone takes my published work verbatim and then copyrights it. Nor did I object when someone took my work, published it, then claimed I took theirs. Nor did I object when someone took my work, published it, then claimed I took theirs. Austin did this in 1990. What Henry and I are trying to do is to get this information out. The first 4 editions of my book in the beginning were not formally copyrighted. But then an accountant friend, Bob Poulin from Toronto, scolded me for not copywriting what I had written. He said that someone could take it, copyright it, and then sue me for allegedly taking it from him. At first, I doubted this would happen, since usually only Christians are interested in passing this information along. Later, I realized Bob's advice was correct. So the 5th edition was the first that was formally copyrighted. I said that while we should spend most of our time on the plagiarism issue, it would be helpful if I started at the beginning. Not the beginning, levity intended, but the beginning of our problems. I referred the mediators to the first step in their background reading material, and then summarized the damaging effect of Morris's 1984 book, The History of Modern Creationism. I explained how every organization needs 2 things, an objective and a way to raise money to pursue that objective. For many reasons, I've made it a policy never to solicit donations. I told everyone in the room they could imagine some of my reasons, but there were others. My speaking and writing would be the main source of income. One of my 2 objectives was to study and conduct research on the origins question. During the 5 years in Chicago, there was only one main product, an all-day seminar program. It raised income and accomplished the other organizational objective, getting the information out to the public, not just to scientists and educators. I did not have time to solicit seminar requests. Since the scientific work was too time-consuming, seminar requests had to come spontaneously from the hundreds of people around the United States and Canada who were what I called creation advocates. These are people with initiative who realized how strong the scientific case for creation is, how foundational it was to human activity, and who want to help inform others of all of this. I told the mediators that someday they might learn something about this subject, that Henry Morris was probably the leading authority in the world on this subject. I'd learned much from reading some of his books. Austin has also made important contributions. The 5,000 copies of Henry's 1984 book was very likely the 5,000 copies of Henry's 1984 book was very likely reading for these hundreds of creation activists. When they read what he wrote about me, the general reaction would be negative, although some complimentary things were said. That negative impression would reduce the rate of seminar requests. At the time, 1984, seminar requests had flattened out at a level that could not sustain the organization. Therefore, Morris's book was the final straw in deciding to close down the organization in Chicago. I accepted I accepted full blame for the seminar program not being more successful up until that time, but Morris's book made the future look even bleaker. I explained some of the personal trauma that book caused, waking up nights for hours wondering why Henry, who was on my board, had done this to me. Moving a family across the country, uprooting 4 children who were in high school or college, and my wife having to get a job until I could decide which direction I was headed. I told those present that no one other than my wife knew the difficulty Morris had caused, not even my children. I also read a few sentences from the first page of the Mediator's background reading, the 1991 letter I had sent to Morris saying that I was continuing to hear derogatory comments about me, all of which seemed to emanate from ICR. If they continued, then I would have to respond more forcefully. I mentioned my offer to meet with Morris to discuss our problems, an offer Morris ignored. The backbiting continued. A year ago, almost to the day, I heard some more false and damaging things, which precipitated everything that led to this mediation. Morris said that he did not know the issue of his 1984 book would arise, and this was an example of why he wanted me to be specific about my charges. The need for me to be specific only pertained to arbitration. Catherine had made it clear to me, and presumably Morris, that anything could be discussed in mediation. Morris said he recently reread what he had written about me. He still felt it was accurate. He repeated some of the things he had put in that book. I said that giving the history of someone else's organization without checking with that person for its accuracy was improper. Morris responded that he talked about my organizations and couldn't be expected to check with, Morris responded that he talked about many organizations and couldn't be expected to check with each one. Besides, he wrote that book while he was sick in bed. He said that he was sorry if it caused me problems. Later in the afternoon, that subject came up again. I asked Morris, what do your readers think when you say your account felt that my organization had to be brought under more strict financial accountability? They wondered if Walt Brown was involved in some financial hanky-panky. My letter to Morris in 1991 explained what that account actually meant. Morris responded that it was true his accountant had said greater accountability was needed. I said, I didn't doubt that. What was more important is the message you communicate to your readers, and that message and other misimpressions were harmful to CSC's work. Peter made a similar comment to Morris. At least Peter had read my detailing of the errors Morris had written, none of which Morris disputed. The Grand Canyon. We took a break. While we walked down to the machines, Peter told me he was fascinated with what he had just read about the Grand Canyon. I agreed. I said it is not a complicated topic. When the break was over, Peter raised the subject of the Grand Canyon and the alleged plagiarism. The conversation rambled. Austin's comments were full of technical mumbo-jumbo, tectonics, Chattahoochee Formation, and others, whose meanings, even if I understood, would not add to any listener's understanding. Instead, such talk intimidates the listeners. In this case, the mediators, into thinking that the subject is beyond their comprehension. I was concerned the whole day would end up complicating matters. I jumped in and said, these details don't relate to our controversy. I said, let's draw a line in time on the blackboard. Peter, who seemed eager to shift to something everyone could sink their teeth into, jumped up to the blackboard and drew a 20-foot long horizontal line. He said, label the middle of that line September 18th, 1988. That was the date I began talking publicly about my explanation for the information of the Grand Canyon. It was a radio broadcast that was rebroadcast over about 50 stations around the country. As mentioned earlier, apparently no mediator had heard the tape recording of that broadcast that I had given Catherine. Throughout that fall, I talked many times about the formation of Grand Canyon. For example, on 20 September 1988, I gave a 2-hour presentation on the subject at Northwestern College. Before the fall of 1988, I had found nothing that Steve has said or written beyond wondering if a lake could have breached its dam and carved the Grand Canyon. After January 1st, 1989, he was saying definitely that the Grand Canyon formed by a breach dam, and he made a major modification to his subsequent books. Austin then said in the earlier years, it was not politically correct to talk about how the Grand Canyon formed. I didn't understand what he meant. He said he tends to wonder a lot about things and write very little. With a quivering lower lip and great sincerity, he said, I swear to God, I never heard your broadcast or any of your talks about how the Grand Canyon formed. I responded, I never said you heard that broadcast or me directly, but it appears that somehow you learned of what I was saying that fall. Cricket asked why I felt that way. Judge Cricket had obviously not read the report or he would have known. I tried to explain as much as I could of the 5,700-foot smoking gun, how map makers put slight but intentional errors on their maps so that if they were copied, the error would be copied and the copyright infringement detected. Greg Wood nodded his awareness of this technique. I said Austin's writing after the fall of 1988 had that unusual number, which I had given earlier as the elevation of Grand Lake. Austin would not have logically arrived at that number any other way. He was using the name I originated, Grand Lake. Austin said that he arrived at 5,700 feet for the wrong reason, but it turned out to be the right answer. The mediators asked to see his use of 5,700 feet. I showed it to them. Austin then said he never said that 57 feet was the elevation of Grand Lake. That is the number he gave for the elevation of the dam that formed Grand Lake. I did not have an opportunity to comment on this. Excuse me. But it was thoroughly rebutted on page 4 of the Brown-Austin exchange, which was in the mediator's reading guide. Greg asked to see my 1989 drawing of the map of Grand Lake and Hopi Lake. Peter and I showed him where it was in the reading material. Wood then asked to see Austin's 1990 drawing. Wood studied them for a minute or two and said that it was not obvious that Austin copied it. Greg was looking at the different shapes of Austin's lines and did not realize the broad concept had been copied. Austin said that he had drawn a map of a lake in 1985 and I had not seen it. Several mediators immediately asked where it was. Austin said it was in his car. They told him to go get it. While Austin was getting it, the mediators recessed for a private meeting. Austin came back with a sketch of a crude version of Hopi Lake and showed it to Morris and me. I knew that his sketch of Hopi Lake did not support his case since that former lake had been known for over 30 years. I let Austin talk on and on, saving my comments for when the mediators returned. When I explained it to everyone, it also showed them how Austin had written me about this map drawing, and I had responded to it with one sentence in the Austin Brown exchange, which they all had. Austin's sketch was irrelevant. The lake of importance was Grand Lake. Peter explained that unlike arbitration or a court of law, mediators can meet privately with each party. Interesting. Unlike arbitration or a court of law, mediators can meet privately with each party, so things that might not be said can come out. I said that everything I had to say could be said in front of everyone. Morris and Austin felt the same way. Peter smiled and said the mediators could talk more freely by meeting privately with each side. They then asked to meet with me privately. Morris and Austin left. Excuse me. Private with Brown. The mediators quickly got to the point. Greg Wood said that I did not have a case of copyright infringement that would stand up in a court of law. Ideas, he said, are not protected. Cricket said the same thing more forcefully. As he was talking, Peter and I had the same thought, but I got it out first. I have never sought a court ruling on copyright infringement. Peter quickly repeated the same idea. In the scientific community, plagiarism is a serious offense. In the past 2 years, it has been a hot topic in the major scientific journals. Careers are destroyed because of it. I asked them if they were familiar with the congressional hearings by Representative Dingell of Michigan on plagiarism within the NIH, National Institute of Health. Greg had heard of it. That seemed to register with the members. I then explained that what I had laid out was more than an idea. It was a theory, a framework of evidence answering many questions and giving broad new insights. I explained dam breaching in more detail and why the explanation for the Grand Canyon became easier once one understood how the floodwaters were removed off the continents. The key questions concerning the Genesis flood were: 1, where did the water come from? 2, where did it go? Until those solutions were well understood and the evidence easily pictured, subsequent events, such as the carving of Grand Canyon, were less likely to be understood. The hydroplate theory pulled it all together. I told Greg that while copying an idea is not copyright infringement, copying artwork, including maps, is, since a major effort goes into producing such materials. This bears on the substantiality test in copyright law. Besides, the creators of that artwork would be furious to know that a creationist used their work. Greg nodded his understanding. The issue of Austin's taking copyrighted material of other Grand Canyon researchers was not pursued further. Concerning Austin's explanation for how he arrived at 5,700 feet, I implored the mediators to read carefully the background reading, which thoroughly rebutted what Austin said. I mentioned the disbelief and humor my son and daughter-in-law had at Austin's convoluted justification for coming up with 5,700 feet elevation. Austin earlier in the day said it was the wrong reason for the right answer. Both my son, a new science professor, and daughter-in-law, a former high school mathematics teacher, have a strong quantitative sense. Judge Crickert asked what I thought should happen. I said that one obvious thing no one should dispute concerning the name Grand Lake. I gave it that name in the summer of 1989. Austin used it from 1990 until the new book came out 6 weeks ago. In that book, he now called it Canyonlands Lake. That will confuse people. We are talking about the same ancient lake, but now there are 2 names. Austin says there are subtle differences in their boundaries. Very subtle, indeed. I explained that in science, once it was realized that 2 different names describe the same theory, phenomena, or entity, the first name takes precedent. I gave as an example the names of Apatosaurus and Brontosaurus, each thought to describe a different dinosaur. The Brontosaurus is the dinosaur shown on the gas line sign. When it was realized after a century that the wrong head had been placed on the Apatosaurus and it was really a Brontosaurus, the rules of precedence dictated that the name associated with the earlier find should be used for both. Therefore, Austin and Morris should put out an errata sheet making that amendment to Austin's new book. I said that EndNote 40 had about 5 other errors of facts dealing with our dispute. They should also be corrected in an errata sheet. Crickert asked if that would resolve the dispute. I said it would resolve about 70% of it. The rest involved false and damaging statements from Austin that I had plagiarized from him. We never had to discuss those at the mediation. Peter asked if I could guess why Austin suddenly came up with a different name. We chuckled and I said I had an idea, but I couldn't get into his mind to be sure. Peter said he wanted to distance himself from your ideas. I nodded concurrence. Greg said that Austin may have come up with the name Grand Lake independently of me. I replied that when Austin first used the name in 1990, I considered that an unlikely possibility. Greg thought it was a very natural name, and Austin might have come up with it himself. I told them that the matter was resolved when Austin told me he had gotten the name from me. See Austin to Brown letter dated June 21st, 1993, first paragraph, second page. At another point, Greg said Austin's ideas may have preceded mine, but he hadn't written them down. I told Greg that in the business Austin and I are in, our oral presentations are almost always taped. I have hundreds of such tapes, as I am sure Austin does. Therefore, if he only talked about it, he should have some tape record of it. I have frequently asked him for such a record, but have received nothing. The Grand Canyon comes up often in the speaking that Austin and I do. Peter asked for more comments on Austin's new book on the Grand Canyon that came out 6 weeks ago. I said that Austin did a much better job of crediting the sources of his ideas. Peter said, "Great, you've had an effect." I have said that others have told me the same thing, but there were still some problems in it. They needed to be corrected, but I was not desiring that this embarrass Morris or Austin. But I was not desiring that this embarrassed Morris or Austin. There needed to be more interaction between me and ICR, especially Morris and Austin. I mentioned a very popular new book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which describes 3 levels of increased maturity: dependence, independence, and finally, interdependence. Peter had read the book. Morris, Austin, and I were independent, but we could accomplish much more if we were interdependent. Unfortunately, Morris and Austin had built a barrier between us many years ago, as I described in the background reading. I then referred to Austin's comment that I described earlier in the day, where Austin said he wished that geologists, meaning me, would stay out of his business. Greg said that his father was retired from the military and living in Arizona. I knew what was coming, so I said that they were the worst kind. Greg said I reminded him of his dad. Dad was forceful and definite. Usually he was right, but sometimes he was wrong. Greg appeared to realize that he may have been slightly offensive. He wasn't. So he said, "We need more people like my dad, people who will stand up to wrongs committed by the bigger organization." Peter said he understood my position. I felt like I had made a contribution and wanted the larger organization to recognize it rather than taking it because they have the greater ability to disseminate it. I disagreed, saying that painted me as a bit too egotistical. When your character is attacked and you see that misinformation spreading, then you must address the problem. Otherwise, our effectiveness will diminish. Peter then told me that sometimes one party has to give something to get something. Would I be willing, in the interest of Christian harmony? I smiled at Catherine. She knew what I was thinking. I explained to everyone how I had opposed mediation because Christian mediators often resorted to questions such as, "Do you love your brother? Do you forgive them?" etc. The problem ends up being swept under the rug while the mediators feel they have brought about Christian harmony. The issues in our conflict are serious. Damage is being done and a clear resolution is needed. Peter said I had a point. Private with Morris and Austin. For the next 45 minutes, the mediators talked privately with Morris and Austin while I collected my thoughts in the lobby. Mary Reagan, the receptionist there, said she had told other 2 gentlemen, Morris and Austin, who had been waiting in the lobby, that they looked as if they were expecting a verdict. They replied that it was probably true. It was clear the mediators wanted to force some agreement. It suddenly hit me that I had never heard of a scientific dispute involving a priority ever being decided in court. The Newton-Leibniz controversy over calculus, the Darwin-Wallace controversy over organic evolution, the Newton-Hooke controversy over gravitation came to mind. The textbooks have discussed these unresolved controversies for centuries. It behooves us to resolve this less significant controversy while all the facts are in front of us. We were dealing with alleged plagiarism, not copyright infringement. I had used the two terms almost interchangeably, but now realized there was a huge difference. Lawyers speak of copyright infringement, academics speak of plagiarism. A student who is caught plagiarizing will often be kicked out of a course or a school. If a student took someone's unique idea and claimed it as his own, he would get little help from the law, which says he did not commit copyright infringement. At West Point, a plagiarism charge is usually ruled on within hours, and someone convicted of it is removed before sunrise. Our dispute concerns scientific ethics, not legalities. Pursuing plagiarism in science has been a hot topic in Congress, especially Congressman Dingell's committee dealing with the NIH. I was invited back into the mediation room. Proposing a process. When I sat down, Morris and Austin seemed in a receptive mood. Peter asked if I had any proposals. I said I did, but first explained my thoughts while waiting in the lobby, the previous two paragraphs. Then I said there's a process that I will follow. There's a process that, if followed, will resolve most of our dispute. The first step in the process was for me to draft an errata sheet to be placed in all unsold copies of Austin's latest book on Grand Canyon. Austin would probably disagree with some of what I wrote, but he could raise his objections to one of the mediators, such as Peter, who would make the final decision. I used Peter as an example because he was the only mediator who had done his homework. Austin asked if we could make the change when the next edition came out, which he thought would be soon. I proposed that if less than 1,000 copies of the book remained, it could wait until the next edition. All future editions would carry the same information. In this way, we would not have to contradict each other in our respective books. Within a year, I will provide a new edition. Everyone seemed agreeable. Austin then thought it would be helpful if the geologists made the final decisions. Excuse me. Austin then thought it would be helpful if a geologist made the final decision. Several names were suggested: Emmett Williams, David Coppich, Ed Holroyd. I laughed at their suggestion of Ed. He was very much in Austin's camp. I was willing to make a conference call with Austin to Emmett so we could both ask him to act as the editor. Austin said he wouldn't have time for several weeks to make the call. I told him it would only take 15 minutes, but Emmett might not want to do it for fear of offending one or both of us. The mediators all seemed to think that Peter could best make the final decision. Peter said he would do so. Later in the day, Peter said he would be away for all of July. Wow, that's nice. I proposed that we only communicate with Peter in writing and always send a courtesy copy to the other person. That seemed agreeable. Morris said he would not need to be in the process. It was between Steve and Walt. With more discussion, we likened the process to having Steve as the author. I was a peer reviewer and Peter the editor. Peter wanted Austin and me to interact with each other until no more could be accomplished. Then he would make the decision. As the next step, I said that many had already gotten the book or prior guidebooks that did not have the errors corrected. To solve the problem, there should be a note derived from a errata sheet placed in Acts and Facts. Morris suddenly came alive. Absolutely not. Acts and Facts has a monthly mailing of 100 to 200,000 and generates most of ICR's donations. Since progress was being made, I thought it best to avoid that battle and move on to the last step of the process. As the final step, I would draft a letter based on the approved errata sheet. It would be sent to a small number of people who I knew and had a special interest in this controversy. Austin and I would interact as we did with the errata sheet, and Peter would make the final decision. Up to 50 people would be sent copies, and I would pay the postage. Peter suggested that both Austin and I sign the letter If either refused, Peter would sign and mail it. Catherine began to draft up an agreement that Austin, Morris, and I would sign before the mediation ended. This we did in a rush at the end of the mediation, once the wording was agreeable to all. Morris was reluctant to sign it. Catherine insisted that he do so, and he did. She said that she would type it up the following day just as it was then written. No changes would be made. Page 7, some final loose ends. I asked Austin if he had recently mailed a letter asking for criticism of me. Oh boy. I asked Austin if he had recently mailed a letter asking for criticism of me. Austin looked puzzled and said he had not. I looked him in the eye, waited for a few seconds, and said that he had done so. A few more seconds of silence passed. You even sent a draft of what you wanted said, but asked him to put it in his own words. You suggested it say, Walter Brown had taken work belonging to others, and some people were bothered by it. Finally, you said there was no need to contact Walter Brown. More silence. While I decided whether to mention my source of information, you sent such a letter to XXXX. Austin then said that he had made a phone call to XX. I contradicted Austin, saying, no, you sent a letter, and that letter was read to me over the phone. I repeated the gist of his letter. Austin finally agreed that he had. I asked him why he had not contacted me first if he felt I had done something wrong. Austin did not answer. I told him doing so would be the biblical approach, and he might have been surprised had he done so. I then asked Morris, Henry, were you aware that Steve was doing this? Morris stammered, but didn't answer. This spoke volumes. I then said, this is an example, Henry, of derogatory and damaging things from ICR being spread about me. Finally, with a puzzled look on his face, Morris seemed to recall hearing about some contact being made with Mr. X. Austin then told us what Mr. X said. Again, I had to contradict Austin. Mr. X only declined to make a statement. I know because Mr. X sent me a copy of his letter back to you. Austin was silent. Austin had been caught lying. I didn't dwell on it, but everyone in the room heard it. I have always been impressed with how sincere Steve Austin sounds when denying any wrongdoing. Even with the evidence of his false statement in front of me, his denials have sounded so convincing that I wondered if somehow the evidence was wrong or if he had fooled himself. It is always best to follow the evidence. Several times, a mediator had raised the question of how Peter would resolve a disagreement between Austin and me in what the approved errata sheet would say. I said that the key question would be, what did Steve write or say before the fall of 1988? Carefully examine the evidence. For example, Austin claimed that he had written in February 1988 about how a breached dam formed the Grand Canyon. If you look at the 1988 and 1989 publications, you would see that was not true. Austin then denied making such a claim. We were in a standoff. Some mediators were anxious to end the meeting and there wasn't time to refer anyone to Austin's written statement contradicting what he just said. I raised the subject of the apparent plagiarism in Schuster's book and Morris his unwillingness to face it. Morris said that he would discuss it, but it would take 30 minutes. Several mediators were anxious to leave. Morris' reference was probably to cloud under which Schuster left ICR. If so, that had nothing to do with Morris's negligence. I asked Greg if he had compared the two writings. He said he had not. Crickert jumped in and asked if this subject involved a person not here. I tried to explain that whether or not Schuster who was not present, plagiarized was not the issue. What was at issue was whether Morris acted on apparent plagiarism. Cricket was adamant. No discussion was to take place if an outside party was not present. He sternly asked me if I understood. I said I did. I wish I had the presence of mind to tell Cricket that from a legal standpoint, he was correct. But we are talking about plagiarism, not copyright infringement. A scientific ethic is involved. If a department chairman at a university took no action when presented evidence of plagiarism by a subordinate, the dean would rightly be furious, whether or not plagiarism had occurred. Catherine jumped in and asked Morris if he agreed that plagiarism was a serious offense. Peter also said something to Morris along the same line. Morris agreed. Therefore, Catherine's statement that we signed carried the mediator's conclusion that we all agreed plagiarism is bad. Catherine also asked Austin if he would agree to not criticize me in the future. Austin agreed, but I interrupted. I said he or anyone else should be free to disagree with me, and if asked, to explain why they felt I was wrong on any scientific matter. Personal attacks, however, should be brought to the person being attacked. I would also appreciate Austin coming to me if he has any scientific disagreements, so we could discuss them. He said he would. Someone asked Austin and me if we could work together in the future. Austin said he could. I said it would require time to build up trust, but I would work to do it. But I would to work at it. I told Austin and Morris that I was sitting on some major new research conclusions, but frankly, I would not want to discuss them with Austin for fear he would claim them as his own. Morris seemed shocked. Do you mean you think Steve would steal some of your work? I'm sorry. I told Morris that while I might be wrong, I sincerely believed he might. Evidently, Morris had forgotten what our controversy was all about. I'm sorry. I told Morris that despite what he may think, I want ICR to be as successful as possible. Nothing would make me happier than for ICR to suddenly solve the evolution problem. I would enjoy stopping this work and perhaps taking up golf again. Morris said that his board members had not been told about this controversy. We agreed that board members and others in our organizations could be told what happened at the mediation. Morris said he probably would not tell his board members. There was to be no general dissemination of what happened at the mediation. Unfortunately, we didn't discuss what would happen if there was a breakdown for any reason in the process of the errata sheet letter, etc. The meeting broke up about 3:30 p.m. Greg had a 3:00 p.m. appointment. Morris and Austin and I stayed behind. Austin said he didn't understand the hydroplate theory. He not only did not understand it, his understanding was so weak that I can only conclude that he has never tried to understand it. Therefore, I explained a few things, how I am saying mountains formed and the Kaibab upward faulting with the Grand Canyon, especially at the monoclines, some physical reasons why subduction and mantle convection cannot occur. Morris, who was listening to some of this, invited me to visit ICR sometime. This memorandum is written, 1, to place in my personal records, 2, to help me recall what happened at the mediation, 3, to show board members and family members, 4, to disseminate more widely if Morris and Austin violate their signed agreement, 5, to correct any misinformation I happen to hear about this meeting, 6, to give those present at the mediation if they later had trouble recalling what happened. Unfortunately, CCR did not tape record the mediation. And 7, to be a starting point to allow people present and at the mediation to correct my recall of what was said. Walt Brown, June 22nd, 1994. Wow. So this is what happened at the mediation. Very jaw-dropping, especially the end. Wow, and again, if you want to see this, how did we do this? I'll show you again. This is okay, we go into Hydroplate, hydroplate.org, go down to Hydroplate resources, to the Hydroplate controversy, and hit this timeline button. This is really cool. And we went, oh boy, yeah, where did we go? We went to the mediation, all that stuff. Somewhere in here must be the mediation. Brown to Coppage. Yep, Coppage was the guy who set up it was supposed to be arbitration, but they backed out of it. So this is where we're at, right here. Personal memorandum of mediation between, oh, no, this was conducted. Okay, was this Walt Brown's? Yeah. Yes, this is where we're at. We're at June 21st, 1994. So let's go back. That's going to be right here, June 21st. We're going to look for that third dot in June 1994. So the plot thickens. And we just want, oh, let's, okay, let's back out of here. Why are we doing all this? Okay, why are we doing all this? Why are we looking through the mediation of something that happened 32 years ago, 31 years ago? Well, it's because there's a theory out there that's making accurate predictions and nobody's looking at it. In 30 years, it's still been kicked to the curb. And a lot of it has to do with false information about Dr. Walt Brown. And so that's why we're doing this. You know, we're trying to shine the light on it. What's happened, what's done in the past hasn't worked. So we're going to the people, the grassroots, and let you guys go through this. And let's see, are there any comments? Let's see. Here we go. Let's look at this comment. Leslie Ladyhawk says, why can't the Christian men just work together and stop slamming each other? I agree. Why can't they? I agree. You know, and there's a theory that's out there that needs to be addressed. It needs to be in the, you know, if this theory was in the mainstream and it was in the museums and it was being discussed openly instead of ignored and slandered and talking about, you know, without the information, we wouldn't be doing this. But that's not what happened. And we're trying to get that theory in there to equip people because it's a huge witnessing. According to Bill Wells, this is a witnessing weapon, if you will. You know, you can have confidence in it. It works. You know, he's a fighter pilot. He had confidence in his weapons. And so that's why we're trying to get out there. We're trying to equip the Christians to stand up to this blind evolutionary dogma based on blind chance that permeates our society. Okay, and this is an effective weapon that's being withheld from Christians, so we're not as powerful as we could be. You know, if we have a theory that makes accurate predictions, that's a whole lot better than what the evolutionists have. And so that's why we're doing this, because souls are at stake. And again, why can't Christian men just work together and stop slamming each other? I agree. If they would have done that 31 years ago, or 35 years ago, when if they would have worked together, I like that quote in there. You know, there's dependency, there's independence, and then there's interdependence. If they could have been interdependent and used each one's gifts, you know, Walt Brown's ideas and ICR's megaphone, man, oh man, we'd have so much scientific clout. But that didn't happen. And so now we're reviewing. Why didn't it happen? Well, there are some people that pulled the rug out from under it, said some false things, and actually he was caught lying. He was caught lying at the mediation. And that's where we're at today. You know, to be sure your sin will find you out, and it's coming out. And we're doing this now while people can still defend themselves. You know, they can still say, you know, this is wrong or that is wrong, or, hey, I'm sorry, you know. And so if you want to see more of this, I'll show you real quick. There is let me share the screen. If you want to hear a personal, what happened here, go into YouTube, the Hydroplate Week of Celebration, and then just type in blackballed. And you're going to get a talk, and it's going to be, whoa, did I spell it wrong? Yeah, I spelled it wrong. I spelled it a lot wrong. So anyhow, there we go. Why was Walt Brown blackballed? And so I encourage you to listen to this. And it's very powerful, you know, when he finds out, when he sees the documents. And Walt Brown didn't tell him. He kept letting all this stuff go. And then when he finally saw the documents, he was just very disillusioned. And it was a very powerful part of the testimony. So I encourage you to watch that. And so what can come about this? I'm encouraging people to start asking questions about the hydroplate. Start going to the museum, start listening to the creation speakers, and during Q&A, it's like, hey, why aren't you presenting a theory that makes accurate predictions? The hydroplate theory has made 58 predictions, and Fred McNabb has found 19 of them have been accurate. Why are you promoting a theory that, why don't you let people think about this and start asking them questions and see what they say? That happened to me one time several years ago. I heard a creationist and I asked him, hey, what about the hydroplate theory? And he says it doesn't work. And I asked him why not. And he said it breaks laws of physics. And I said, which laws of physics? And he said, I don't know, but the geologists he knows don't go along with the hydroplate. That's just like trying to have an evolutionist agree with creation. The evolutionists I listen to don't go along with creation, therefore I don't. And the people that they're depending on apparently don't know the hydroplate theory very well based on their questions they ask, and so we're just trying to shine light on this very important topic. This is going to have to be a grassroots movement because the people on top, and well, there are a couple of people on top who want to learn more about the hydroplate, learn more about the flood models, get all the information out there, but there's resistance in their organizations. There's also coercion being done, so people are afraid to even ask questions about it on camera. They won't make a video of the hydroplate because they'll lose a bunch of funding from a major organization. And so that's where we're at. This is science. And well, I mean, in evolutionists, of course it's like that inside. Christians shouldn't be that way. If there's multiple theories, put them up there. Let people think. Come let us reason together. And so my challenge is, which one of the big three creation organizations is going to put it into their museum or put it into their document? Say, hey, here are the two theories. And I think I saw ICR, they compared the flood models and the hydroplate theory was one of them. This was several years ago. So the dam of censorship is breaking. Praise the Lord. And there's a tidal wave of truth coming. So the question is, are you going to be in front of that tidal wave, bringing it on, or are you going to be resisting it and get wiped out, getting bowled over? And you pick and start sending this to creation organizations and seeing what would they do? Will they allow us an opportunity to think? Or are they just going to present one theory as a sacred cow and you better not kick it or else we're going to make things financially difficult for you? So ask them. Can you, would you, in Christian love, would you support a Christian who supports the hydroplate theory without blackballing them? That's a valid question. That's a real valid question. And so there you are. This is round, I don't even know what it is. These are going to be so out of order. So this is Walt Brown's Mediation. So we'll see what happens after mediation and see if it gets followed or if it gets broken. So again, thank you so much for listening to this. And my whole intent is to let the truth prevail. And thanks again. Have a blessed day. We'll see you in probably half an hour. We'll throw up another one. This is so interesting. Wow. So anyhow, any other questions here? All right. Yeah. Why can't Christians work together? I agree. That is so sad. So that's why the hydroplate theory has been kicked to the curb all these decades. They don't want to deal with the can of worms that makes Christians look bad. Well, if there's bad things that happen, let's deal with it and move on. Again, we're not trying to tar and feather anybody. We're not trying to bankrupt any organization. We're not trying to do any of that. We just want the truth to prevail and that a theory that's making accurate predictions would be discussed. So thank you again. And may God bless your efforts and guide your steps.